your personal brand also determines how people treat you to a large degree. So going into a corporate, there's a lot of unknowns. You don't know how people will react to you. You are a junior. But at the same time, there's an overarching culture that kind of guides the way of working, the behaviors, and everything else that happens on a day-to-day basis. And you often look towards that to gauge when and when not to do certain things, when and when not to say certain things. And you've got to understand, and from my personal journey, I've understood this, was lucky enough to understand this early enough, was you have a place in the organization, but you walk into the organization at a point where you know absolutely nothing. Yes, you've got a tick and a degree and an honors degree or whatever it may be, but you're walking into a place where you don't know anything. So your brand is literally just the values you bring, how you present yourself, the way you talk to people, and the way you treat people. Everything after that sort of starts becoming secondary. But people respond to you in the way you actually treat them and talk to them in the corporate world, and in any world for that matter. And I'm assuming it's the same in your business.
Yes.
But that being said, in order to grow that, you've got to be intentional in terms of what part of me do I need to put forward more often than not in order to grow my personal career in this space.
Hello everybody. Navigating your way through the business world in South Africa is tricky, and even more so in your 20s as you find which route that you'd like to take. And this is where my guest today, Waseem Gangat, has some valuable insights. Waseem is a product of a graduate program through a listed company in South Africa, and his career has fast-tracked and progressed at a rapid rate. It's a wonderful dialogue between somebody who's advanced their career in the corporate space in their 20s and somebody like me who's undertaken more of a solopreneurship role. I really enjoyed sharing and comparing notes with Waseem, and I think that you will get some really wonderful information and insights out of this episode. Like, share, subscribe, and please enjoy. Waseem Gangat, how's it going? Welcome to the Expect Performance podcast.
Lekker, Clint. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Really happy to be sitting and chatting to you a bit today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great. It's an interesting one today. So you and I'm 34. You're moving towards the 30s now, slowly but surely. 29, 30 coming up. But we've taken different routes in terms of our career paths. I've spent most of my time as a solopreneur, as it would be termed. You've spent most of your time, all of your professional career, in the corporate space. And there's many ways to move around the professional sector, the private sector in South Africa. And we've done it two different routes. And it's very interesting to kind of compare notes as to how things work for somebody in the early section of their career in the private sector with respect to corporate versus your own entrepreneurial thing. So give us some context as to how you got to where you got to. Where did you study? What are your ambitions? Why did you end up where you are now?
Thanks, Clint. Yeah, I think it's a broad context of a question that you've given me, and I think it's quite enlightening to see what the opportunities are in South Africa, both through a corporate lens as well as through a solopreneur lens, very similar to your own. So maybe just touching on my journey as a start, I studied at UKZN. I did a BCom. I did my honors there as well. And I think the biggest thing in your honors year is the talk around what's the next step. And everybody's talking about where are we going to work and what is the next big opportunity out there. And as sort of throughout that year, you've got a lot of career days where the big corporates come in, and sometimes it ranges from mid-firms to big firms, into large food manufacturers, FMCGs, accounting businesses. So you kind of exposed to a whole number of industries within one hall. And I think at a time like that sometimes becomes a bit overwhelming for a lot of people. So you automatically see the first one, the second one, and you're like, wow, this actually looks good. Not knowing what it actually takes to get into one of these. And you look at the context of where these head offices are located. In an ideal world, you'd like to start your graduate career or your career in the working world in a head office somewhere. given Durban and the situation in Durban and the location, we've got probably a handful of them, as opposed to Gauteng, where you've got most of your head offices. So having been exposed to that throughout that year and seeing a number of different companies coming and putting their best foot forward to say, we want the top 5, 6, 10 graduates within this university, and obviously going to a number of others, you start applying to ones that appeal to you, but also what kind of fits your profile, where you're at geographically and what you actually want to do. I think at that point in time, you're not absolutely certain of what it is you want to do.
I don't think many people are at that age.
No.
Once you step out of varsity, that's what makes it so overwhelming, I guess, is because at varsity you're planning, you're studying for your next exam, your next assignment, for the next 3, 4, 5, however many years, and then that's done now. So now there's that vacuum, and how do you fill that vacuum?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think in all of that, there's a bit of fear naturally that comes out of it. It's do you go on your own in a career that, for example, what you've done probably allows you to do that? When you come out of a commerce field, you generally are limited a little bit because you need to develop a skill set to actually get it. So you look at a number of these corporates, what do they offer in their grad programs, how long their grad programs are. They offer very robust graduate programs, there to gear you up to sort of give you an opportunity to upskill yourself. So at that point, I had a look at, what is the biggest opportunity for me within the KZN region, primarily because of my family responsibility. I'm based in Durban. And yeah, I had a number of options when I looked at where to apply. And this obviously ranged from a number of corporates based in Durban. So when I got in touch with a lot of companies, I was very clear on the 5 or 6 companies that I would like to work for. I think you always have the wish list. You know what they offer. You often research them. You often have a look at what they do. And I think one of the biggest parts for me regarding the one that I actually chose was trying to understand and unpack what the company does and what the impact is locally. Having come out of varsity, we were quite exposed to the macro environment in South Africa and what those pressures looked like. And I think getting involved in a business that would kind of have that impact to try and nurture or try and restructure some of how those macro factors actually work locally was something I wanted to get into. I wanted to be involved to see how we can actually impact and change things locally. So applied to a couple. I went through a couple of very, very robust interviews. The multinats are a lot more focused on broader thinking, sector reporting. You go through literally exams to get into these places and the final interview. I'm obviously ended up in RCL, very similar process, 6-step process, takes a long time to get into. But I must say, process was seamless with a number of the bigger corporates in terms of getting back to you and all of that. So that for me was a big thing. And I suppose the next thing is to say, well, why did I choose who I chose? RCL for me looked as kind of geared up as a company that was looking towards growing. They were a company that started off as a chicken business, then acquired a food court business and grew from there. I had only got to know about this at that point. So immediately as a grad, I was like, okay, it's a local business based in KZN head office and a company that's growing. So at that point, employing roughly about 20,000 people or something. And to me, that immediately, kind of set it off. And went through the process, was quite seamless. And at the end was faced with 3 choices. Got through all 3, had an option of all 3. And then decided on RCL for that very reason. I think one of the biggest ones was the way they actually portrayed their graduate program, the 5-year journey and what it looks like. And I think that to me was very appealing.
So the 5-year journey, tell me about that.
So how it works is generally, and this is in a normal circumstance, it's a very structured approach to graduates. But that being said, the RCL way is quite different in that it allows you a lot more entrepreneurial thinking, but in a more structured way. So for me, and I had friends who were on the flip side of the coin, so I got to see what they were doing. The 5-year program at RCL says that how it should be in an ideal world is if you join with us, we will upskill you within 5 years to reach a manager level. And that's, again, this is their plan. It's never cast in stone. It's just kind of a rule that they follow. And whether or not it's still the same, I'm off the program now, so I'm not entirely sure. But it is something that shows you in every single year, there's milestones that you've got to achieve. And in every single year, there's a number of things you've got to deliver on and upskill in and grow in to understand the business and understand process and then grow from there. And hopefully in that period, you reach a point within the 5 years to actually get to management level.
Yeah. It seems to me, as a solopreneur, and my interpretation of the environment in the workspace as it is now in 2024, there's a reluctance to want to give of your time for free as youngsters. And I did internships. They weren't mandatory internships at varsity, so you had to go out and actively look and find people who were experts in their field. And I spent some time at the Sharks under Mark Steele, the head strength and conditioning specialist there. And you learn, but you give of your time willingly, not to be remunerated with money, but to be remunerated with knowledge.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's missing at the moment with some people. Speak to me about the importance of that willingness to volunteer of your time that you mentioned in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing for me at that point was exposure. I wanted to get exposed to what the world of work looked like in either of these industries. So manufacturing industry, going into the likes of a big FMCG manufacturer and doing an internship there that's unpaid, gave me a lot of clarity in terms of my journey. Going into an audit firm and working there for a little while gave me a lot of clarity in a space I didn't necessarily want to be in. Mm-hmm. But what they both brought to the table was an understanding of a skill set that I'd need to have to run a business at some point in time in my career. And that's ultimately where I'd like to get to. And for me, it comes down to not having, kind of having your feet on the ground at that point in your life. Because you got to open yourself up to as much experience as possible. If you don't do that, you either going to 5 years down the line decide you made the wrong decision. And as much as there's a lot of good career counseling out there, and that I still believe that getting that on-the-ground experience, it's not about the money. It should not be about the money or the remuneration at that point in time. Right now, you're looking at where do I want to be, what does this mean for the rest of my life, and how do I actually get exposed to these environments? Because when you see how those people are thinking, what their lives look like, what does a company like that do, you start understanding, and in an FMCG world, you could go into anything from manufacturing through procurement, through logistics, all the way through. Then, obviously, there's still supporting functions. Whereas in an audit firm, it's very compliance and sort of governed in the way they do things. So, and I would never have known that had I not actually gone into this. So it's a big challenge that we face at the moment where a lot of grads do come into the business. And I've been lucky enough to be a part of sharing my journey with a lot of them. And what I have also found is that there's an unclarity of listen, okay, I've managed to get into this massive corporate business. I'm kind of entitled to grow into this management role as quickly as possible because that's what I've signed up for. But it's not that. Mm-hmm. It's entirely not that. And I often refer to this thing about owning your journey. And it starts when you're at varsity, when you're actually starting to understand the world of working. And look, not everybody gets it right the first shot. You often would move industries, and it's not abnormal to do that. But to get a better understanding and to come into your first job with a slightly clearer mind, I would absolutely recommend that. And a lot of companies still do those internships. In fact, some of them are still paid for a period of 3 months or 6 months or holiday, vacation work and stuff like that. But at that point, it's something you've got to try and do to get an exposure to what the world of work in that industry is like. And that'll give you a good, clear guide.
Yeah. So the word that you mentioned there many times is clarity. It is so important to get clear on what you want. And exposure and experience is the currency, from what it sounds like, just out of varsity. Because knowing what you want is just as important as knowing what you don't want. Yeah. What can you exclude? And then you can narrow it, and you can narrow your focus. Okay, these are still avenues that I'm willing to explore, and get that currency through experience. Tell me about aligning your brand, because you mentioned owning your journey. So with that comes an element of what do you stand for? What are your values as Waseem? Your personal brand. Moving your personal brand and aligning it with the values of a corporate company.
So I think that's a portion you look for upfront, but you're never absolutely going to know what it's like. You know, you often hear that corporate world is a dog-eat-dog world. You often hear these things getting thrown around. And for me personally, the journey's been a bit different. I think you also decide how you want to perceive things. Your personal brand also determines how people treat you to a large degree. So going into a corporate, you know, there's a lot of unknowns. You don't know how people will react to you. You are a junior. But at the same time, there's an overarching culture that kind of guides the way of working, the behaviors, and everything else that happens on a day-to-day basis. And you often look towards that to gauge when and when not to do certain things, when and when not to say certain things. And you've got to understand, and from my personal journey, I've understood this, was lucky enough to understand this early enough, was you have a place in the organization, but you walk into the organization at a point where you know absolutely nothing. Yes, you've got a tick and a degree and an honors degree or whatever it may be, but you're walking into a place where you don't know anything. So your brand is literally just the values you bring, how you present yourself, the way you talk to people, and the way you treat people. Everything after that sort of starts becoming secondary. But people respond to you in the way you actually treat them and talk to them in a corporate world, and in any world for that matter. And I'm assuming it's the same in your business.
Yes.
But that being said, in order to grow that, you've got to be intentional in terms of what part of me do I need to put forward more often than not in order to grow my personal career in this space. So it's an alignment between the corporate goal and the business goal and your personal branded goal. And that's how you navigate the way around it. And for me personally, there were a number of elements that I latched onto. One of the biggest things was quickly understanding who played what role within any team that I was involved in, and latching on to the right people to understand process first. Because if you never understood, or if you don't understand process, you're often not speaking from a point of know-how or anything for that matter. So trying to understand that and building that relationship intimately. It could be with the most junior factory floor guy, where you have a conversation with him, and that's your starting point, and he talks you through a process, and then you move from there and you speak to your production head, and you move from there and you speak to one of the more senior guys. It's about building those relationships, but at the same time upskilling yourself in that process. And I think often the value of that is not necessarily appreciated. We often see a lot of graduates in our space come in and expect to walk into a corner office at some point in time.
Yeah.
And it simply doesn't work that way. So that value that you come out of varsity with your eyes wide open to exposure, open to not chasing the big money yet, not chasing the corner office yet, just treating people right, being a good human being, showing who you really are, and most importantly, going forward and actually doing the hard yards and understanding business process, understanding the lay of the land, and understanding all of those kind of things, and building a network within the organization is the first step that I took personally in my journey. And for me, my journey was a little bit different, but that is the crux of getting to where you need to get to and where you want to get to in a corporate career.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that is very different to my experience, I would say, in my first 2 years as a solopreneur, in that I think that people underestimate the significance of the importance of moving into a framework with which you can readily access knowledge and experience of people that have been in the industry for 15, 20, 25 years.
Absolutely.
That it's in their best interests to upskill you as quickly as possible, because then the team performs better, the business performs better. From my standpoint, it was me and me alone. My personal brand was directly a representation of the business brand, because I was the business. So there's no differentiating between the two. The things that I do on a daily basis are going to represent the brand of Expect Performance. Plain and simple. Because it's a service-related industry as well, you're dealing with the person. I'm not selling somebody a product that I'm sourcing from somewhere, exporting and importing, etc. I'm not trading. It's a service-related industry. Even more so who I was representative of the brand. And I think that access to intellectual property is a massive, massive advantage for anybody in the corporate space, because you can, if you make the decision to make use of those opportunities and to latch onto people and to be a sponge and to align yourself with the right people who are willing to help you, you can fast track yourself so quickly. As opposed to in the solopreneur space, I had to learn on my feet. I had to make mistakes. I had to find people to mentor me, but it wasn't really in their best interest to mentor me other than out of the goodness of their heart, you know.
Yeah.
And it could be people from different spaces. I had to actively go out and do those things, which requires effort, and it requires a lot of, in some respects, courage, because it's easy to doubt yourself in those positions when you're young, you know. So I think people undervalue the importance of moving into a framework like that you just described.
Yeah, they do. And I think, so maybe to share a little bit of why my journey ended up the way it was. I had joined the graduate program at RCL in 2019. And almost 3 to 4 months in, there was a bit of a vacuum with a restructure of some sort. And basically what had happened was I was now reporting directly into our group marketing director and with a dotted line into one of the MDs. And automatically this world of opportunity opened up. But you are a 4-month-old graduate, literally. And you're sitting in the seat and you're like, okay, you've got 2 senior leaders now who expect a specific level of delivery, but also understand the fact that, you're not necessarily going to deliver at that. You've got 0 experience. And what I found, and that for me was a big learning curve. So I was then given that opportunity to say, look, we're not necessarily going to fill the vacuum for now. We will assist you in overseeing what you need to deliver, but we're giving you the opportunity to do it. And that for me was a career-defining moment. I think that for me was a time when I realized, you know what, I've got the support, but you ask yourself, to what you just said, do you really have the grit to do it? And you ask yourself those questions. And I then decided, you know what, it's a now or never moment, and it could be as early on in my career as this, and maybe this is the time I need to do it. And so I said, yes, I'll take it. I'll there was no change to remuneration, there was no change to where I was or anything. It was just a matter of there's 10 things that are highest priority that's got to be delivered in this period of time. We'll set you up with the right people. Are you happy to run with it? And I must be honest, I said yes. There was a lot of traveling involved in that time. There was a lot of new things. You don't understand business process, firstly, let alone just what the corporate structure looks like in terms of getting things done the right way. But it was probably one of the biggest learning curves for me. And I still remember I was launching a brand up in Gauteng, and it was 2019 at the Rugby World Cup final. And I sat in the Kit Kat store in Pretoria watching it with a whole lot of the guys, because we were actually launching a new brand on that day. So, there's memories of sitting there and watching consumers, understanding consumers, doing things that you don't necessarily get exposed to at a head office environment, because now you're not just playing the role of one person. You're playing the role of 3 or 4 people to try and get the job done. And that was the one biggest thing that this MD had passed on to me, was that to understand, you've got to be there. You've got to go there, whether it be in the factory, whether it be at the store, whether it be in the consumer's home. You've got to understand what to do and how it's done so that you are better placed to actually make a decision going forward. And that for me was a moment where I realized, you know what, this is going to shape who I am as an individual, but it's also going to shape my career quickly in a way that could set me up for what I really wanted to achieve. And I was clear very early on in my career on where I wanted to go. And I knew that starting off in the marketing space was my foot in the door. And any experience getting into the front end would be valuable. And so I latched onto this opportunity, and I ran with it for a period of just over a year. And with that, subsequently, there was promotions that came with that. And being on the grad program for, I think it was 14 or 16 months, I was then promoted into a management level. Now, to your question earlier, you look at the 5-year journey
Yes.
versus 14 or call it 16 months now, and you ask yourself, well, what accelerated that? And for me, it was two things. It was mentorship from the MD himself, and secondly, it was just a big learning experience where I had to step up, force myself up, and do whatever it takes to deliver. And I don't know if you necessarily get that kind of an opportunity in a multinational business. I'm not sure if they would rather replace somebody from overseas or somewhere else just to kind of fill that, where this kind of opportunity comes around quite early on in a company that's a little bit more open-minded and a little bit more, flexible in their approach. So I took that opportunity and I ran with it for a while, got to the management level, an exec was brought in, and we kind of ran that whole portfolio for a while, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, we launched some new stuff, we launched new innovations, and I mean, it was a great learning experience in the front end. And I'm very grateful for a lot of those people who've added to my journey. A lot of them took the time to explain a lot of stuff to me and get me to where I am today. And I look back at it and I think, you at that point, you're just trying to deliver the project. So you're looking at the deadline, you're like, we've got to deliver this. But you're not absorbing or actually reflecting on, listen, these are all the different learnings I'm actually getting out of this. And these little nuggets that people are actually placing in you, whether it be in terms of leadership on how not or how to actually do something versus how to manage an income statement or manage certain profitability ratios or whatever else it may be. A lot of it was a new exposure for me. And those nuggets sort of culminated into getting to where I am today. And growing from that, I was quite clear at that point that once I reached the management level for a little while, that running a business and looking after the profitability side of something is kind of something I actually wanted to do. And I went back to the very same MD and I had a chat to him and I said, listen, this is where I actually would like to go. And this is where I see my journey playing out long term. And yeah, I think that was about 18 months, 2 years ago maybe. And we then had a conversation just after that around an acquisition. And that's when the new business was bought. And we took over last year and I was offered the GM role from this year, Jan. So acted in that role going up to the GM role as an associate for a while, which also gave me a good grounding because you're coming from a front end where you're exposed to marketing and a bit of sales and understanding on how that works. You don't know anything about operations. You don't understand how the operation works. Now you're responsible for the profitability. So your dynamic changes. Your leadership approach needs to change. You've got heads of department reporting into you. You're responsible for a lot more than what you were in the past. So I think that the company themselves were very intentional about ensuring that I was set up the right way and leading up to that journey. But the one thing I've learned is that you've got to push yourself into a space where you're not comfortable. You've got to be absolutely uncomfortable. And you've got to be asking yourself questions every day, like, listen, I don't know what this is. And there's days where I ask myself, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm going to figure this out. But you've got the right team behind you. You've got the right people in the right places. And in a day or 2 or 3 days and a little bit more exposure to that, it becomes second nature.
Yeah. I think what you tapped on there earlier, there's a misconception sometimes that a person should stay in their lane. To be pigeonholed into a certain role, I'm going to do my job, fulfill my responsibilities, and once I've done that, box ticked, I can rest easy, I can go home, I've done my job for the day. It sounds to me like there was a willingness and an enthusiasm to move into as many different spaces as you could to get a big picture and an understanding of what was going on a bigger level. And that is not something that one has to do. That's you going above and beyond and trying to understand the workings of the industry that you're in and the company that you're in. Now, going back to my space as a solopreneur, I had to do all of those things out of necessity. One, because as you're building a client base in a service industry, you don't have disposable, or not disposable income, but extra income to spend on outsourcing things like accounting, invoicing, social media, all of that type of thing. You have to do all of that stuff yourself. I had to do all of that myself. So with that, it was compulsory that I had to learn and kind of get good enough in a variety of different spaces outside of just my field of expertise, which was the training part of it. So that's interesting because you don't have to do that, but you chose to do that. I had to do that because otherwise there's many aspects to running a business, not just the service that I provide. So that's an important lesson, I think, for people, especially in their 20s, moving into the corporate space, is to try and learn as much as you can, even if it's outside of your immediate responsibilities.
Absolutely, and I think the one thing that I always try and remember is that in order to become a captain of industry at some point in your career, you've got to understand every facet of it. RCL has one of their values that was called the more curious value. And it's something that I initially read on a piece of paper and was like, okay, cool, it's more curious. It's one of their things. Sometimes we get lost in the fact that they present such good stuff to us, but we don't often absorb it. The minute I had this gap and I started realizing, listen, but they actually live by this, that you can actually, if you are willing to take that step, as you said, and open your mind to being more curious and asking the questions, and there's no silos. For me, that's a big thing within this journey within RCL, is that they always operated in a way that there's no silos. If you went in a completely separate function, said, I'd just like to sit in to understand what's going on here. And that was encouraged, especially as a graduate, because as a graduate, you kind of have free reign to all of that. And that made the journey a lot more fruitful, and it allows you to do that. So it also goes back to the part of owning your journey. I think you've got to understand that to become a well-rounded individual, a leader within a business, of whether it be in your business as you currently are, or a corporate business, you've got to understand what makes the people around you tick. Now, in your space, that's probably more your clients. In my space, it's more making sure I drive optimum results out of my team. So I think that being said, there's a number of facets that you've got to pull on in this journey of owning your journey.
Yeah.
And I find that the entitlement part of a lot of graduates that we see today, and from what I've heard, it's not just in our industry, but it's across a number of big companies, that they last 6 months or a year because I'm not growing fast enough. I'm not the guy on the poster. I'm not doing this. I'm not getting the recognition. But it takes the hard yards. You've got to understand it, and you've got to go and drive that journey. And I remember having a number of conversations with people around, this is actually where I want to go, but how would you do it? And going to the next guy and saying, listen, you are an MD today, but how did you do it? And understanding and kind of putting together a picture of, well, listen, this is a different route my career could take, or I could take some totally different route. And the ability to move within a company to kind of have those different experiences, look, that's a big plus. Whereas in your world, I can only imagine it's about you owning every service provider relationship at the same time to try and get them to deliver, whether it be your finance function, your social media function, or any other function for that matter. Yeah. Whereas in a corporate world, we had access to that. We've got access to all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I'd like to touch on there. One is, again, coming back to the system and the framework where you can readily learn from other people as quickly as possible and how they've managed to get to where they want to get to. But secondly, you mentioned earlier the role that a mentor plays in your career. How important is it for a youngster starting out in the corporate world to find and attach themselves to one mentor in particular, to be their North Star, to be their guiding light that they can bounce things off of?
Incredibly. I don't think I can stress that enough. Having the right mentor that will give you context into the business world, but also your place in the business world and how to grow your place in the business world is important. So there's often a thing that I referred to, and I saw this firsthand in my journey. You get exposed to a certain level of leadership, and at a director level and above, there's this equation which I call the vision to value equation. And they are the vision. They set the vision. They know where the business is going. They have that, often people say that ability to see around the corner, but they have that foresight in them because of the years of experience. You then get a graduate like myself that comes in, and there's this massive gap between the two of us. But the value sits between the vision and me. And that's where we start playing a role. But in order to deliver that value, they need somebody to execute that. And that's where we come in. And the only way to actually develop a skill to, at some point in your career, be able to set the vision or the strategy is to start at the bottom with the value and start executing and learning your way up. For me personally, mentorship has kept me very grounded as an individual. I've taken a lot of guidance from my MD who mentored me for a long time, and kind of always just, sometimes in the most informal way, course corrects me. And I think for me, there's been a number of lessons, whether it be an internal mentor or an external mentor, that you'd get, and you'd get a lot of exposure from either. But I think having that, to your point, having a person that has an experience within a business on how to run a business, and then having an experience with somebody who is a mentor on the outside world, that also keeps you in touch with everything else happening around you. Because in a corporate world, you often get sucked into the delivery of what needs to be done. And you're so focused on that, and those four walls become your be-all and end-all. And having somebody on the outside that kind of just keeps you, in touch with the real world as well is equally as important. But that owning the journey part for me has been a big part of intentionally having two mentors in my life and making sure that those two mentors guide what I want out of it and don't necessarily have all the answers. And that's what I think often, and I had a chat to a grad the other day and said, but my mentor said I must do this, and I did it, and it didn't work. But your mentor doesn't necessarily know everything. They're there to guide you. It's your intuition. It's your journey. You've got to own it. But I think access to mentorship, and I assume in your space, is probably finding a businessman who's probably built a business who can probably give you access to a number of resources. That could be the mentorship you look for.
Yeah.
My mentorship looks at somebody who's going to drive my journey, because the access to the resources in a corporate world is already there.
Yes, that's a big difference between the solopreneur space and then the corporate space.
Yeah.
Is the access to that capital, the access to those experiences. You mentioned that you traveled a lot with that new opportunity in starting in 2019. So you get fast-tracked into those opportunities, maybe travel locally, maybe then it's exposure to travel internationally. In a solopreneur space, there has to be this accumulation of a client base, and you really do live between the four walls of your business. And if you're lucky enough to build, to scale, at a much later stage, you get the opportunity to enjoy those experiences of maybe going overseas, going to conferences, going to different seminars and presentations, etc. But that has all come as a result of the capital that's been accumulated through my hard work or the solopreneur's hard work. It's been years in the making, and their patience plays a huge role. You have to be in it for the long game. Whereas an advantage to that corporate space is you have direct access to those opportunities, provided you can show that you've got enough value to offer.
Absolutely, and I think access to it's a number of things. You have access to technology, you have access to mentorship, you have access to resources in terms of capital. So you get exposed a lot quicker to a much bigger world out there and a much higher level of thinking in terms of what's available out there. Whereas I think in a smaller business, it's probably a little bit more difficult to get that upfront. And you've often got to tap into the right person for the exact need that you need.
Yeah, exactly. On the flip side, though, if I think back to how I felt, I've started Expect Performance 8 years ago, 2015, and I thought back to when I was 25, which is when I would have started that, and I wondered if I ever doubted my abilities to be able to deliver a service and to be considered the expert, somebody paying me to deliver an opinion and my knowledge on the subject and to help them. And it actually never crossed my mind that I doubted my abilities. I always felt like, I don't know if maybe I was ignorant to it, because if I compared to what I know now to what I was when I was 25, I mean, it's like light years apart. But I suspect that in some respects I was ignorant, but at the same time I would say that there was more continual willingness to want to learn rather than be embarrassed or doubting myself of what I don't know. It was always a willingness to want to learn something new each day. You've accelerated your career. Like you said, as a general manager at 29. So there's definitely been a fast track to you and your career so far at RCL. But speak to me about the element of combating that stigma or that self-doubt associated with your age and how quickly that's progressed in the corporate space.
Yeah, so I think, naturally from the word go, it's been something that I've been faced with. Primarily because as a fresh grad out of varsity, 4 months in or 6 months in, there's this gap, and automatically now you're exposed to this level of thinking with a number of people that indirectly report in a matrix system still to these two people, but they are supporting your journey and what you need to deliver as well. So automatically in that entire cycle, you are, and I'm not saying dishing out kind of instruction, but managing work between cross-functional teams to deliver the project that you're working on. And naturally with that came a lot of exposure to senior executives within the business, but also me saying to them, but I kind of need your help here, and I'm leaning on you to get this job done, and them then weighing in. And I must be honest, I'd say 7 out of 10 were more than comfortable with saying, you know what, there is a gap, we need to support him, and we will do that. So I think for most part of it, yeah, it worked in a nice way with a lot of those people, but you often get a certain number of people that look at you and like, well, at least you feel this way, he's a youngster, he's young, he doesn't know much. But that's where I've never been afraid in my journey to put up my hand and say, well, actually, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. So in that world of from that 6-month vacuum, call it, into that 3-year journey, very early on, I kind of used that to my advantage. And I openly said, I don't know. Please show me how you do this, or show me what it takes to get this done, or what is the process, map it out for me. And that helped me also build relationships, because people felt like, you know what, he's not just trying to mess us around here. He actually doesn't know. So let's try to help him. The age part of it came in a little bit later as I transitioned into this GM role. So being the youngest GM within the RCL stable was one element that was never looked upon as that. It was always seen as, if you're ready, here's the opportunity, and it's where you want to go, and they support what they think you can deliver with the right support in place. The flip side of that is, when we took over this business, there's a number of people that now report into me that are a lot older than I am. And managing that dynamic is different, because there's two angles here. One is age. The second thing is that you're an unknown to them. It's not like I worked at head office or any of our RCL structures with them. It's a totally new acquisition. So a very, very interesting thing. But the one thing I can tell you that's always helped in that is to have conversations with people at a deeper level than just what work is about, and build a true relationship with them.
Yeah, I love that.
And I've often latched onto that, because that is your way of getting to know a person, and it takes age out of the equation. And you start working towards a common goal. So I know you personally, I know a little bit about your family, but next up on that is, when there's work to be delivered, it's not me dishing out the instruction. It's me saying to you, as my head reporting into me, to say, this is our goal, this is what we need to achieve, and how are we going to do this? And building that mentality of taking them on the journey with me has been a big part of it. But where it's also helped is the business integration process is something I was well aware of, and I could do easily, whereas understanding their business was something they needed to bring to the table. So it was a nice balance of trying to understand this. And I think the biggest part of this also goes down to core values. And I think the higher you go, the more important the core values come in. I noticed this in this acquisition period, and you go into a business and there's a lot of new people there, a lot of new people that don't necessarily know what to expect from you. But if you stick to the basics of respect and the basics of treating the right people carefully, understanding they're also in a certain space in their own personal lives, but making sure they feel valued for who they are, I think you extract maximum benefit out of them. And I think they respect you in return because of the humility and the sort of position you take towards them. So that's helped me close that age gap very quickly, and lobbying them on the same journey that I'm on to say, we're here to deliver what we need to deliver for the business. So it's not me and it's not you, it's us.
Yeah.
And that's been a big part of it.
I love that inclusive aspect to what you're saying. And to your point, it sounds to me like it's about establishing trust as quickly as possible.
Yep.
So with me, it's about establishing trust between myself and my client as quickly as possible. For the majority of my career so far, because we're both reasonably young, it's not difficult to imagine that most of my clients are older than I am. So I, as the expert in the field but still younger, have to establish that relationship and establish that connection of trust as quickly as possible so that they take my opinion seriously and we can collaborate together on a project which is that person playing better golf, gaining muscle, losing fat, whatever the case might be. And then getting to know them as a person as well, knowing what their struggles are. There's a saying, it's a cliche, but you do good business with good people. And it's exactly what you're alluding to there. Getting to know your team on a human level rather than a hierarchical structure of I'm reporting to Waseem and I should be there because on another hierarchical structure being age, I should be ahead of him.
Yes.
So I love that. That's a fantastic way was to finish off and wrap up this interview. I think it's wonderful to see your career progressing like it has been. And I think it's such a valuable lesson that people in their 20s looking to get into these grad programs with big corporates or even to find jobs within corporates not through a grad program. You're an ideal example of what's possible in South Africa at the moment and how we can move forward and how a person can accelerate their career and move up into the corporate world. So well done and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Clint. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Not so fast. It's a new year, which means it's a new outro. And let me level with you. It is such a cool feeling when I see that Spotify subscribers number increase on the weekly, when I see the number of people listening to the episodes going up. And it really makes a huge difference. Have you ever done something and you feel so good when you get rewarded by some positive feedback and you really feel like you're making a difference? That's what it means to me and that's how I feel. And it goes a long way if you like the show, share it and subscribe it. Thank you humbly, and I'll see you next week.